everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to night 4 of the 2023 ChemKnits Chanukah special. For the inspiration of tonight's colorway, I went back in time to 2018 and one of the first full skein bonus colorway I ever dyed for Chanukah. This is a melted wax colorway that I created by dyeing twisted skeins of yarn 3 times, layering on yellow, blue, and red to create these blends of colors that sort of emulated wax dripping down a menorah. Was 2018 the very first Chanukah special I ever did? I think it might have been, but honestly, I don't remember, and I don't know if that's because I've done a lot of these now or because I'm almost 40. Tonight, I want to emulate the technique I did back in 2018, dyeing twisted skeins 3 times, layering them with primary colors, but with a twist. I want to dye different sized bundles of yarn for each of these steps, starting with 10-gram twisted skeins, then doing 50-gram, then 100-gram skeins near the end. And what this is going to do is give us different sizes of the patches of each of the colors, because when you have less yarn twisted up, you end up with more surface area because you can get more twists per inch. Now, this is going to be fairly easy to manage because when you buy 10-gram mini skeins, they come already twisted up, and so I can use those to help get us started. The yarn we're using today is Wool to Dye For's Platinum Sock and DK. All of the yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. For the first round of dyeing, we are going to dye these 10-gram mini skeins twisted exactly how they came from the manufacturer. And you can see that we have small patches of the yarn exposed. There actually isn't a ton of yarn that isn't on the surface area here. More yarn will be hidden within the twists as we combine these minis in groups of 5 or in groups of 10 and twist them back up. And I promise my rationale for doing things this way is not because I don't want to untwist and retwist all of the 10-gram minis. I mean, that's part of it, but I'm curious about the kinds of patterns we might get when we do things this way. This type of colorway would be really hard to scale up to do on a full skein because I can't twist a full skein as much to get this kind of surface area and the resist that we get in one of those mini skeins. And this is something that if you've ever spun yarn, you'd be a little familiar with, but the thicker the yarn is, the less twist you can get in it. The thinner the yarn, the more twist you can do without having things feel like it's twisted really, really tightly. The colors we're going to use today are more classic primary colors versus a cyan and magenta with a yellow, which is often where I go for primaries. Although now that I'm looking at this, I don't remember if Sapphire Blue is technically a primary, meaning that it is only one pigment, but it is a very blue, and so it should work fine for our purposes here today. I'm wondering though if it dissolves funny. I know that this is my old batch of Fire Engine Red, and that does dissolve a little bit gloopy. I have a newer batch. Maybe I'll use the newer batch for today, and then at some point we'll do a comparison of the old versus new batch of Fire Engine Red. But anyway, the 3 colors we have here are Dharma acid dyes in Sapphire Blue, Brilliant Yellow, and Fire Engine Red. And the plan is to use approximately 0.15 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn of each color. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator masks, safety glasses, and gloves to measure out the dyes. Since I want 0.15 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn of each color, and I'm going to dye 400 grams of yarn in this batch, I'm going to measure out 0.6 grams of each of the 3 colors and then dissolve it in some hot tap water. Alternatively, I could have made a dye stock of these 3 colors and then used it across all of the yarn that I'm going to be dyeing because I'll have other batches of this overall technique. But I want to dye through one complete set first to see if I want to adjust any of the levels of the color before committing. And I feel like just measuring out each dye color directly versus dealing with stock solutions today. I think for precision, if you're dyeing everything on one day, making up a stock solution and then using that does help you get more consistent results from batch to batch than measuring out the dye powder. But ultimately it comes down to preference and whether or not you want to have some leftover stock solutions at the end of the day. In this 12-quart kettle, I have 32 cups of water. And we're gonna start with the red dye today. Often I will go lightest to darkest, but I didn't want the yellow to be the most all over. And I'll say the new Fire Engine Red dissolved really well. I'm not seeing any strings or anything. I'm rinsing out the cup. I also don't remember entirely if that was a thing or what, but so far, so good. Now we need to add some acid. 32 cups of water. Let's start with 8 tablespoons of white vinegar. That gives us a ratio of 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to 8 cups of water. That's a ratio where I often start. And I am going to give the dye bath a good stir to both make sure our acid is well distributed, but also if there are any dye particles that hadn't dissolved, now they should be dissolved. Okay, and here I am with 40 mini skeins of platinum. And I'm dropping them in. This might give us more of a pink versus a red. Certainly we're getting some pink. It does depend a little bit on the surface area. And now I just need to let things sit and to let the color absorb. We don't need to heat it for 30 minutes necessarily because we're going to be processing the colors more and more and more, but it might take close to 30 minutes for most of the color to bind to our yarn. So we'll be back in a little bit. It's been about 15 minutes and there's maybe like a hint of pink left in the dye bath, but most of it is in the yarn. So we're now going to remove the minis. I'm using tongs and I'm gonna let as much of the water drain off as I can before popping them into another container where I'm gonna have to wait a while to let them cool, because with this much water in it, it'll take a little longer to cool, and I don't want to make things too hot on my hands. There's a chance I may want to increase the total amount of red, but we'll see how this first colorway comes out before making any decisions about changing the proportions of dye. Just depends on if I like the pink with a few hints of red or if I want the red to be more dominant. But I'm curious, there probably actually isn't a ton of white left in here. So again, I'm gonna set this aside so it can cool. Now I plan to reuse the dye bath as long as I can, which means I wanna soak up the dye that we have left in here. And it's not very much. Here I am with 100 grams of platinum DK. It's the same yarn base as we're using before. And the only reason why I'm dipping it in is because the yarn was dry, and so this way I can eventually get it all wet. And I'm gonna leave this in here for 10 minutes or so, just to soak up all of the rest of that pink dye onto our yarn mop. Okay, I'm gonna remove the yarn mop and I'll shift the zip tie onto it so that way the lightest part of our pink goes in first with the next color. But we do need to increase the water level a bit more, so I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. Our red yarn is still a little bit warm, but I can sort of comfortably handle it. And what I'm doing now is squeezing out the water from each of them. And this liquid I will be able to put back into our dye bath. And it's promising that there's no color in this liquid that we're collecting. As I made my way towards the bottom of the pile, things got a lot warmer and steamier. So I shifted the yarn a bit and just let it sit so that way it could cool off a little bit again so I could comfortably handle the yarn. So now all this water, almost 4 cups, 3.5 cups, is gonna go back in the dye bath. And from our little pile, we can start opening up the minis. Now there will be some variation, but you can see we've got mostly pink with very little white. I think the next 2 times we end up twisting our skeins, we're gonna have like, there will be bigger patches without yellow and then even bigger patches without blue. Now, one difference also between doing twisted skeins 3 times with full skeins versus minis is that on the minis, as I'm untwisting and laying them out, they're all at sort of different orientations from one another versus the way the strands are within one individual skein. And this will be similar when we take our set of our 50-gram set that we have here and we twist it up. Once we turn it into a 100-gram set, I think we will experience something similar there. So now I am just twisting this up, and I'm going to do this with the rest of the yarn. You'll notice when I am twisting these skeins that I have them on the counter. If I were to hold the skeins in 2 hands to twist like I would when yarn is dry, I risk stretching out the yarn more than I want to because the yarn is a bit more delicate when it's wet. And so that's just why I try not to add a ton of tension when I'm doing these twists. This also makes these twists fairly loose, but that's okay. I do have one regret. While I was doing this, I did not separate the fingering from the DK first, so I'm really gonna need to do that, I guess at the twisting stage. Whoops. It's time to dye up our yellow. I'm gonna add our yellow dye, and I'm gonna rinse out the cup so we can get all of the dye. And the water level's still looking a little bit low to me, so I'm gonna add another 4 cups of water with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar into the pot, and I'm gonna heat it up until we have some movement on the surface, so it's nice and hot before we add the yarn. All right, here we go. We've got our 8 50-gram mini skeins into the yellow. Good news is that the dye bath is big enough that they all fit. Things are looking orangey. But the nice thing is that we see a fair amount of yellow too. So with any luck, we will have, I don't think we'll have a full rainbow, but with any luck, we will definitely have some bits of orange, red, and yellow once we open these up. But now, again, we might only need 15 minutes again. We'll see how long it takes for the color to absorb. We may or may not need 30 minutes, but I will check periodically to see how much color is left in the dye bath. We're waiting for it to get a lot lighter than what it is now. It's been about 20 minutes and almost all of that color is in our yarn. Maybe there is a little hint. Now, you'll notice when I put the yarn mop in that any residual color seems to be striking really quickly. And part of that is a surface area issue. When the yarn is twisted up like this, the dye can access the outside. There's just less available area. And while it might penetrate into the yarn a little bit, although you can see some of those reds peeking out, it just takes a little bit longer because there isn't as much surface area exposed. But anyway, I'm gonna set the yarn aside to cool for a little bit. I'm coming over with the yarn mop, which as promised, you can see I have the lightest end going in first. Now there is very, very little yellow here. Enough that like once we add the blue, I don't think it'll turn it green at all because there isn't much. But I will go ahead and leave the yarn in here for around 10 minutes or so. And I'm gonna put a wet paper towel around my tongs and I'm wiping the edge because you can see, I could see like a bit of a yellow ring around there, and just want to mop that up. I'm gonna turn off the heat because we're still gonna wait for the yarn to cool for a while. Part of this yarn definitely has some more peach notes to it down there, but overall it's still very pastel, and who knows what will happen once we layer on more blue, and then we might continue to use, depending on how we think, oh no, the zip tie just snapped. And depending on what we think of it then, we might leave it or continue to use it when we do our next batches. I've never had a zip tie snap just like this. I've had them snap at times when I'm using them and initially bending them, but this was unusual. Oh my gosh. Before untwisting any of our orange skeins, I once again squeezed out all of the water to reuse it. Now let's untwist. You can see little bits of red in there. And I think the skeins are gonna vary. We could end up with a fade this way, I don't know, but you can see lots of pink and more orange areas. Now this time counting is gonna be easy because to go from sets of 5 to sets of 10, all I have to do is open up 2 sets and then we are ready to twist. And so I'm gonna twist as much as I think I can, and the nice thing you'll see orange on the surface. There's not a ton of yellow, but we could get some greens still, and depending on the ratios, some purples. But we're gonna twist these up and go get our dye bath ready. The camera wasn't recording, but I just added our blue dye in, rinsed it out with water once, and I'm gonna bring over 4 cups of water with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. There we go. And I'm going to let this heat up before we add the yarn in. Okay, we are hot. I have our 400-gram twisted skeins, and into the pot they go. Oh man, look at all those colors. Oh, it's gonna be so pretty. I am so excited and curious and I don't know, feeling all the feelings. Now this time I'm gonna want to heat our yarn for 30 minutes, kind of no matter what. So I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes and then we'll come back and check in. But it's been 30 minutes and I'm going to remove our yarn. The blue is really dark. Part of me wishes that I dyed the yarn all over in the blue. I wonder what I'm gonna think when I open it up. And if I don't love it, we can over dye the whole thing in some blue and not do this last twisted. But I'm curious. It's hard because it's so dark on top of the colors, and yeah, I don't know how I feel, but I'm intrigued. So I'm gonna set this aside to cool so we can open it and wash it. And in the meantime, I need a new zip tie for the yarn mop. Thankfully, the zip tie breaking did not mean that I lost a good handle on it. And we're gonna bring the yarn into our blue all the way now. And this is definitely gonna make it a little bit more neutral overall. It's very, very pretty. I don't know if I'm gonna keep using it for the next round and keep layering the colors on more and more. So to be on the safe side, to give me the most amount of options, I'm gonna leave this in here for 30 minutes. But as I said, I might decide to use this as the yarn mop for the next stages. We just need to make sure it has 30 minutes at the last stage. All right, let's open up these skeins. There is a bit of water, gonna wring that out. Oh, that's so pretty. Oh, wow, okay. What's so funny is this is way more red than I anticipated. But you know why it's so red? Because that was the color that we started with. Oh, this is actually really cool. I mean, the color of the blue is really awesome. Let me find like a single mini. Oh, that is pretty. Ooh, that contrast. Ooh, I like it. I am really excited. I was, again, nervous that I was gonna be not a fan, but I'm actually really into it. It's funny because there are some really big stretches of mostly the pink, like right there. I mean, we'll look at some of the individual minis in the end because I'm gonna have to sort them. But it's funny because I'm so curious to see like how different a bunch of these minis feel. Oh my goodness. Oh, I love the surprise because there's definitely like a huge stretch with no color that is mostly on the inside, but I think every single mini probably has some patches of blue. Oh, this feels so bird-like. It's funny, I feel like a rainbow that has brights but also some like muted tones, I tend to call very bird-like versus floral. But I don't know, I do kind of feel like a bird of paradise floral vibe or something in here as well. Oh, this is so, so fun. Okay, let's go wash it. Let's wash the yarn. I mean, I do think it would be fun to do a colorway like this sometime where we do the mottled yellow and red and then over dye it with blue. I think that that would be super, super pretty. I'm not gonna add some clear dish soap. I suppose there's a chance we could have some blue bleeding, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not really seeing any. Our yarn mop, when I removed it from the dye bath, is a very sort of medium toned neutral. I think I'm gonna hang on to it and use it as a yarn mop off camera as I go ahead and dye all of the additional rounds. It has some really lovely neutral notes right now, but I'm curious what will happen as we layer more and more color on a bit randomly. Let's see how we're doing. Yeah, I'm not seeing any bleeding, so I'm gonna put this yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. As I dye another round of this colorway, I thought that it was worth chatting a little bit about primary colors. Normally, when I'm playing with primary colors and acid dyes, I prefer to start with a yellow, cyan, magenta group versus a yellow, blue, red group. And the reason for this is that it gives me a little bit more flexibility. When you have a cyan and magenta and a yellow, you can mix a blue, you can mix a red, but when you start with a red, you can't really take that color and go and mix a magenta, because to mix a red, you need the magenta and the yellow. You can't really break that apart. Today, I'm starting with the classic primaries rather than creating my own, because I don't want the colors to break at any of these steps. Color breaking is when you have a blend of different pigments and they bind to yarn at different rates. And so you might see one color towards the center and another color more as a halo coming out. I want the blends and the secondary colors we see on our yarn today to come from these primaries layering on top of each other. And these are primaries from Dharma. Each of these dyes that I'm using has only a single pigment mixed in there. So while if I was going to recommend you buy a limited collection of colors, cyan and magenta are probably higher on my list than red and blue, but I do absolutely also recommend that you have a primary red and a primary blue in your collection because they're very useful for dyeing projects. I do have videos where I've created classic Crayola-like rainbows, starting with the yellow, cyan, and magenta, and so you can go and explore those. I've used those to create gorgeous reds. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. Here is some of the yarn we dyed today in addition to our yarn mop, which is a lovely, lovely green. I think it's kind of cool that this is so green. And I mean, there is some green in our yarn, but that isn't a dominant color. And it just shows how layering with the resists, I mean, the proportions here are different, but layering with the resists, you can get different things. But in this yarn mop, there are a lot of different tones in here, more yellow patches, more blue patches, and it's just fun. Here are two different bundles of yarn that we dyed in this project. One fingering weight, one DK. I don't know if they were dyed in the same batch, and I would say it feels like I see a lot more blue in the DK, but that isn't necessarily indicative of anything except for how tightly I twisted the final skein. But what I want to do is lay out the minis from both of these bundles so we can see how consistent the colorways feel. I'm laying this bundle out and I'm realizing that this is one that is a mix of DK and fingering weight. So I forgot all about that. Good thing to have bored now. Let me finish. Okay, I laid them out with some slight asymmetry. There's some that have very little blue and green and some with more blue and green. So there is some asymmetry to it, but that doesn't mean that if you had a skein of yarn you dyed this way, that the asymmetry would be one end would have more blue, the other end would have less. What it means is that it's non-repeating, and so you might have rounds that have less blue and rounds that have more blue, but yeah, it just gives you something that is a little bit more random in terms of the distribution pattern, which is something I love about this type of technique. But anyway, I better split this into fingering and DK. I did take a look at our second bundle here, and things feel overall more balanced throughout. I didn't notice any in particular that felt much lighter than the rest. Thankfully, sorting these colors is no big deal. That did not take long at all. But I do need to go twist them back into minis. Isn't it silly? Sometimes you think about it, they start off as twisted, you dye it, you wash it, you retwist it. Oh well, at least I have an automated twister, and so it's very easy on my wrists, and I just watch a TV show. But anyway, let's look at the minis. And here we are all twisted up. It almost makes you wonder what would happen now if I were going to go dye these a fourth time, twisted up in minis like this. However, while they were wet, it would be really hard to do this. To twist them up as minis consistently to dye again, and so I don't recommend it, and I don't think that that's something I want to try. I think if I want twisted 10-gram minis to dye, I'm going to start with the commercial skeins. But these colors are so pretty. I don't think I would have gone for this combination just sort of organically, but I love the way it ended up. Although now I'm wondering what would happen if I switched up the order. I want to see a comparison of, starting with the red followed by yellow. Is that the way I did it? Oh my goodness, I think I did the red first, followed by yellow. What would happen starting with the red, or if I started with the blue? Like, what if I changed the order around? What differences would I get? Ooh, that could be fun sometime. Although again, it needs to happen on mini skeins, because if I was doing this on full skeins, well, then you don't get the size difference and the change in the way the resist patterns work. Well, still something to think about for another time. The colorway we ended up with tonight is really, really beautiful. Yes, it is quite different from that melted wax colorway I shared at the beginning. We don't have very much white at all. The colors do feel a lot more orange overall as well. But that's not a bad thing, because sometimes taking inspiration from a colorway or a technique doesn't mean I'm trying to recreate something literally. Sometimes it might, but tonight I wanted to play around with the overall technique and see where we ended up. And I think we ended up with something really gorgeous. Now, one thing I have a feeling has come up in either the live chat or will come up in the comments. Ooh, Rebecca, what if you twisted each of the mini skeins 3 times and dyed them? I was just about to say, I'm never going to do that. Maybe I would do that sometime, but not for the scale of Chanukah, where I'm dealing with over 100 mini skeins each night. When I go and I twist up the mini skeins at the end of the video, it takes, I think, probably about 10 seconds to twist up each dry mini skein. And I'm definitely slower when it comes to twisting things that are wet. Now, when I'm twisting the dry mini skeins, I have a skein twister. And if I were to use that with a wet mini skein, I would fling water everywhere, which I don't want to do. And I also risk stretching out the yarn a bit. So this is something that we could do at some point in the future, but I would only be interested in trying it on a much more limited scale versus doing it over 100 times. And truthfully, that is something that I do need to consider when I'm picking out the techniques and the plans for dyeing yarn for Chanukah, because I need to make sure that it's something that I will both enjoy dyeing, something that will have a beautiful end result, but also something that I can manage at the scale that I need to do for Chanukah. The biggest problem of the overall technique from tonight is that I still don't know how I would emulate this type of colorway on a full skein of yarn. I think that that would be challenging. And the only thing that comes to mind would be to have the yarn in a pan with no resist and sort of add stripes of some color onto it. I think that that's the closest way I could emulate that first layer, but it still wouldn't be quite the same. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and we are now halfway through with Chanukah. But I guess we're not halfway through with our videos, because after the 8th night of Chanukah, there'll be 2 bonus yarn dyeing videos and then a vlog. So there's 11 videos total, but only 8 nights of Chanukah. What colors do you think I will be playing with tomorrow night? I am so excited for you to see how the video is gonna turn out. To make sure you don't miss it, please subscribe and turn on notifications. That way YouTube can give you a little bit of a reminder before the video premieres at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Plus, subscribing really does help support the content here. But while I have your attention here, you should head over to the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop and bring home some hand-dyed yarn that has been featured in one of my videos. And there might still be a little bit of yarn that I dyed during this year's Chanukah special available. You can find a link to my Etsy shop down in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I want to thank you all for joining me for this Chanukah celebration, whether you're celebrating at home with your own families or you're celebrating with me. Happy Chanukah, and thank you so much for watching.